Well, that was certainly one of the games of all time at the Big 12 tournament. Kansas survives, hangs on against UCF somehow, some way. They tried to give it away, it felt like at times, but they get the win in overtime, 98-94. We're going to break it all down next. This is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty, and this is a live edition of the show tonight, even later than I was expecting because of what happened in the game. Kansas at the Big 12 tournament opens up against UCF, and truly one of the more bizarre games I think I've watched, and just in terms of weird things that happened over the course of the game. But Kansas finds a way to win miraculously. They beat UCF in this matchup, 98-94 in overtime. They move on in the Big 12 tournament. They're going to face Arizona tomorrow night. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. Kevin, I don't even know where to start with this one, man. This was just a crazy game, but Kansas finds a way to win.
Yeah, crazy for about 80 billion different reasons, right? I mean, you had horrible officiating on both ends. You know, you had AJ Storr having his career game basically at Kansas, but to your point right before we came on, AJ Storr not really touching the ball down the stretch, even though he was on the court. You had a weird play to kind of end regulation with, you know, giving the ball to KJ on an ISO. You had Kansas. I tweeted out, Nick, you've been to the Big 12 tournament. I've been to the Big 12 tournament so often. Those teams that played the night before, and we may see this tomorrow from Kansas's and against Arizona, the legs kind of go between that first timeout, TV timeout of the second half, and the second TV timeout of the second half. Kansas built a double-digit lead, and then everything fell apart. You wind up giving up these wide open, in rhythm, practice gym jumpers. You wind up turning the ball over, having bad shots, bad possessions. And next thing you know, you're in an absolute dogfight. You're down. There was just so much wildness going on, Nick, that I think you kind of have to. There are positives to talk about. There's negatives to talk about. Keyshawn Hall's a junior, by the way. If anybody wants to start handing him some Kansas City barbecue as he walks out the locker room, as you know, future enticements for joining up the Jayhawks. It's Keyshawn Hall's terrific, and Keyshawn Hall's a problem against most people. For Kansas, just about the only guy that has any chance against Keyshawn Hall is KJ Adams. You know, against Flory, the scoring game is too advanced. He's too strong. He's too quick for some other guys. He is really, really good. And you have to give Keyshawn Hall all of the flowers, because I think without Keyshawn Hall, this would have been a very different game. He's only a junior. Chum, I think, is a freshman. So UCF, if they can hold on to those guys, you know, they at least have some building blocks for next year. Darius Johnson is a senior. He won't be there anymore. But yeah, Nick, you had guys that Kansas could maybe typically count on having not so great games, and you had guys that you're not expecting big games for showing up big. One thing I did want to talk about was UCF's strategy with Hunter Dickinson, because I do think that Chum's length did bother him some. The announcers were kind of talking about like it was a one-on-one situation, and he had the help of the entire UCF roster, and Hunter did not get a good whistle once again. But what I was going to say is, if you're Arizona, if you're whoever KU plays in the NCAA tournament, don't you look at that and say that, hey, this is how we defend Kansas, is don't let Hunter Dickinson beat us in the paint. You know, send an absolute army at him and make other guys make shots.
Yeah, we've seen a variety of strategies from opponents on how to deal with Hunter Dickinson. But I think what UCF employed tonight, has seemingly been the best way to slow him down throughout the season, right? When you just instantly throw bodies at him and double him, it really bogs things down. Now, there were a couple times where Hunter made a great pass. He had a couple of great passes to Flory on some big-to-big action, had a nice pass to KJ Adams, had this incredible cross-court pass that he hit Diggy Coit for in a corner three, which was insane. And then another part of Hunter's game that really helped out in this game was he was able to pick and pop successfully and hit multiple threes, which is obviously something that I think going back to when he first committed to Kansas 2 years ago, you expected to see a lot more of that. And remember, if you remember right, last year to start the year, he was shooting over 50% from three to start the year, and then just absolutely cratered for the rest of the year. And we didn't really see any more of that, and we haven't really seen a whole lot of that much this season either. But he was able to do it tonight, hit a couple threes. But yeah, to your point, I mean, that would be the strategy that I would use. Just throw bodies at him, because the other part is consistently we have seen Hunter Dickinson just get the absolute worst whistles. And It happened again tonight where there were multiple plays. The one that was most maddening to me was late in the game. Kansas was up 2, I think, and Hunter Dickinson is just getting absolutely assaulted. I mean, he's got two guys just literally yanking his arms down as he tries to go up, and that's apparently clean basketball. And UCF goes down the other end, and a guy like falls down and it gets an immediate foul call. So that was very frustrating to watch. But yeah, I mean, Hunter Dickinson, I mean, to his credit, even with the way that UCF defended him, and even with that being probably the way most teams should defend him going forward, he was still able to impact the game in a very positive manner, and still obviously was able to do what he did as well, which was significant. But yeah, back to Keyshawn Hall. I mean, unbelievable game from him. And you mentioned something about the legs going away. I think Keyshawn Hall's legs went away. He cramped up late in the game, and then he had a three from the top of the key that he airballed. I think maybe Kansas benefited from that late in the game, because his legs went away, and they had to try to go to other players late in the game.
And KJ got after him defensively.
KJ had a couple great defensive possessions.
Yeah, in the same way, if you remember the game against UCF at Allen Fieldhouse, that was KJ's first game back from injury. And, Hall was kind of cooking Flory in that one, and they put KJ on him for the last few minutes, and he cooled him, and was a big part of the reason that Kansas was able to win that game. KJ was some great late possessions on Keyshawn Hall again in this one. But to your point, I do think he was wearing down. How about AJ Storr, though? It's something that we mentioned real briefly earlier, just saying, hey, he had his career game, and yet, and he was out there in crunch time, Nick, but at the same time, he wasn't getting the ball in crunch time. It was
kind of bizarre,
an interesting situation when you had a guy who really had that hot hand, but he was attacking well. He got a bucket or two in transition. He hit some big outside shots. He was one of many players who attempted to defend Keyshawn Hall with limited success. And again, that's not a knock on AJ Storr at all. That's a testament to Keyshawn. But I do think, if Kansas gets it, and I'm not saying, hey, AJ's got to go out and score 17, 19 points each game from here on out, but if Kansas gets an engaged offensive version of AJ Storr, that really helps this team out. And to Noah's point about Remy, this was about the time period where you started to see Remy click. It was about the time period where you started to see Malik Newman click back in 18, even though Malik Newman was a starter for almost that entire year, did get benched, I believe, in February for a game or two. But he really kind of took off and had kind of fresh legs as Devontae's legs kind of faded that year because Devontae had played 40 minutes in about 35 different games in that season. I'm not saying expect anything like that from AJ, but if he can come off the bench and give you some legitimate offensive pop, that really changes the complexion of this team. Nick, the other thing that changes the complexion a lot that you've been talking about show after show after show is Zeke Mayo hitting shots and being potentially Kansas's number one offensive threat.
Kevin, Can we be honest with each other for a second here?
Oh God, here we go.
Brutal honesty.
Brutal honesty.
Did you honestly believe we've somewhat tossed around the idea of AJ Storr could be like Ray Martin, could be like Malik Newman, whatever. Did you honestly believe that was remotely possible prior to tonight?
No.
Honestly, did you seriously think that was possible?
Not at all. Not even a little bit. And like I said, like I'm not saying he's gonna, hit step back 3-pointers in the national title game. And I'm not saying, hey, this is, he's going to go on a Remy like scoring run or anything like that. But let's also not forget that like Malik Newman's 2 games before the Big 12 tournament in 18, he played Oklahoma State and scored 7 points on the road. The game before that, he scored 9 against Texas. And that was with him playing a lot more minutes than AJ Storr.
Okay, but AJ Storr hasn't even been doing that.
I'm just saying Malik Newman came out of nowhere with that. And again, I'm not saying AJ Storr is going to turn into Malik Newman, who basically was the best player in college basketball for like a month. But I am saying we have seen all of a sudden that switch just kind of flip for guys where they are able to provide an impact late in the year. Honestly, at this point, if AJ Storr is giving you 5 or 7 points a game off the bench and is engaged offensively to where the defense has to account for him, that's a major positive compared to what he had been bringing. Oh,
absolutely, because he was bringing basically nothing. so yes, anything above that is would be a major positive. Yeah. Listen, I don't mean to rain on anybody's parade. I'm just saying I don't color me skeptical of the possibility of
not raining on parades. You're crapping on parades, Nick. You're
color me skeptical of the possibility of AJ Storr turning into Ray Martin and or Malik Newman down the stretch. Obviously, what he did tonight was great.
Combination of both of them.
Yeah, that's true. You get Remy Newman out there in the form of AJ Storr.
Fantastic.
I don't. Obviously, what he did tonight was great. He actually ended up fouling out of the game, funnily enough, in overtime. But as a scorer off the bench, it's fantastic. And that was kind of what we've been looking for is, Hunter's going to get his. And if Zeke is going to be inconsistent, you would like to have a third option. And all of a sudden, here's AJ Storr to do that. And obviously, Zeke Mayo was great tonight as well. Also, so take that as you will. But
clutch free throws too. A lot of clutch free throws.
We mentioned AJ Storr didn't really touch the ball much towards the end of the game. He ends up making a layup in transition at the end of the game that puts Kansas up, and then he makes 2 free throws as well late in the game that helps them win it. So yes, he was obviously a major piece of Kansas winning tonight. AB mentions about the NCAA seeding at all. I want to get into that. We haven't really touched on Zeke Mayo either yet, so I've got to talk about that. Also, maybe some of the lowlights, DeJuan Harris, want to probably talk about that a little bit as well. Yeah. We've got tons more to get to here tonight, so stay with us. We're going to take a short break, but of course, that gives us a chance to tell you about Home Field Apparel. You can shop Home Field Apparel at homefieldapparel.com. Use code PAYHEAT24. We had Chris earlier in the chat mentioning about KU baseball. Yes. Setting an NCAA record, 5 consecutive home runs. Not 5 home runs in an inning, not 5 home runs in a game, 5 consecutive at-bats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at-bats in a row.
To back.
And if you love that, then you're absolutely going to love what I'm telling you next, which is we're going to have Dan Fitzgerald on our show coming up. So be on the lookout for that. Dan Fitzgerald's going to be talking to us coming up later on as well. So there's going to be some KU baseball content coming your way also. Very excited to have that conversation with him. And all that is to say, Home Field Apparel has a fantastic shirt. I actually have it. It's in my dresser right now. With the Jayhawks, kind of that baseball tee Jayhawks script. You can get that. You can get tons of other gear. I'm, of course, rocking the namesake of the show here, Payheed from Home Field Apparel. Be like Tyler. Be like Tyler. Home Field Apparel is the bomb. He's absolutely right. So be sure to shop Home Field Apparel. Use that promo code, PAYHEAT24, 15% off your first order, and we're back in just a minute.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story. like Bryan Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Bryan Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
This is the Paid Podcast, a live edition tonight on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jacks KCSN. If you're hanging out with us tonight and you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button as well, and drop a comment. If you're listening on our audio platforms, you can subscribe wherever you get your audio as well, and at least a 5-star rating and review also to share your thoughts. You can also find us on social media at PayheedKCSN, at KFlaherty KCSN, and at NickSpringer29. Tons of ways to get in contact with the show. Thanks so much to everybody that's joining us tonight and dropping some live comments here as we talk about this game. AB had mentioned before the break, asking about KU's NCAA seeding and how this game impacts it. KU at this point, if you're looking at bracketology, is basically going to be a 7 or a 6 seed at this point. Those are kind of the two most likely options. I don't know that winning tonight's game guarantees that they would get a 6 seed. If they win tomorrow, or I guess today, considering it's almost midnight here in Central Time, if they win against Arizona, I would think that pretty firmly bumps them up to the 6 seed line. I don't know that they could get any higher. Like maybe if they win the whole Big 12 tournament, we talked about this on one of our previous shows. If they go out and win the whole tournament and maybe they rack up wins against Arizona, Texas Tech, and Houston and en route to that in 3 straight days, maybe that gets them up to a 5, I guess, possibly. But I would say you're probably looking at being a 6 seed more likely than not, or I guess a 7 potentially. But I would say probably 6 is where you're at, unless you go out and win the whole thing and maybe you get to a 5.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But hey, look, Nick, you're just 4-2 this season, and your only your only 2 losses are to Texas Tech and then at Houston. So make them a 1 seed, you cowards.
Couldn't agree more. 4-2. It's been a great season. All 6 games. It's been a lot of fun. Forget about everything else that happened, by the way. Zeke Mayo is another guy we need to talk about, Kevin, who was outstanding tonight from the get-go. He was locked in, hit some threes, ended up shooting, what was he, 5 of 7 from 3? I'm looking at he was 5 of 7 from 3. 5 of 7 from 3.
And one was an absolute heat check early after he made his first 3.
Yeah, so basically
he basically punted the ball at the rim from midcourt and said, "Hey, if this goes in, I know it's a good night for us."
Yeah, he ends with 24, and this is what we've been highlighting. You mentioned it earlier in the show. This is what we've been talking about. Like, if you know Hunter Dickinson's going to have a positive impact scoring-wise and creating, you need that secondary punch from the perimeter, and it pretty much has to be Zeke Mayo. There's no other options, I think, at this point, unless AJ Storr just turns into Malik Martin in March. But he's your only option, and he stepped up in a big way tonight. Got Kansas off on the right foot in this one, and Kansas gets out to an 8-0 lead early, and then UCF really fought back, and eventually you end up with a 3-point game at the half for UCF or for Kansas leading UCF at that point. And the second half was just utter chaos. I mean, you talked about it. Kansas just starts raining threes. Eventually they build a 10-point lead, and you think, okay, this Kansas is separated. This should be, not relatively stress-free down the stretch, and instead the complete opposite happens. UCF goes on a 15-0 run. They eventually take the lead back, and then it's just back and forth slugfest down the stretch all the way, eventually leading to overtime. Somebody else mentioned earlier about that play at the end of regulation with Kansas tied and trying to get a bucket. Yeah. It goes to KJ Adams. I believe DeJuan Harris had fouled out of the game at that point, or was he still in the game?
He was still in. Still
in. So they end up going to KJ Adams, who drives on the baseline and
steps out.
Just kind of inexplicably steps out of bounds twice. It wasn't even really close, like way out of bounds. Somebody asked about that last play, and I mean, my take on it is Bill Self has players on this team that he obviously trusts. And I think KJ Adams is maybe number 1 on that list. And so I don't know that the play was necessarily designed for KJ Adams, but certainly it was designed for him to get the ball. He did get the ball. I don't know if it was designed for him to go score, but it ends up being kind of just another flubbed late game moment for KU, which is scary considering you're going into the NCAA tournament and you can't screw that up. And at this point, Kansas has a bit of a track record this season of not being able to execute late in games. Like setting aside the Arizona game, which was, I think, the one game where they were able to late in the game close it out. You have multiple examples of late game situations in which Kansas either had an offensive possession late to take the lead and or tie and flubbed it in some way or another, or, in the case of the Houston game, choked away the lead, right?
Yep.
So that is something that continues to be.
West Virginia game, you have the foul of a 3-point shooter at the end. It's been a lot of different things late in games where you can point at like execution, but you can't necessarily point at one singular thing or one singular guy that's holding them back in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, the West Virginia game you had like 3 different plays late in that game where you could have scored and made something happen. And Noah's bringing up a great point about KJ Adams, and I don't want to dog on KJ Adams because he was, besides that, pretty much fantastic throughout the game, right? I mean, he was making winning plays, had a couple nice dunks like he always does, and again, we kind of highlighted at the start of the show, he was the only player that even had a chance of shutting down Keyshawn Hall, and late in the game, he was able to do that a couple times. So overall, this was a really great game from KJ Adams, except that play at the end.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I think too, Juan was put in kind of a rough situation with the foul trouble because it is really, really tough to guard Johnson, that point guard at UCF. He's terrific. He wound up with 22. He's a guy that drives into contact really, really well. And when you pick up that early foul and hey, I need to stay on the court, you aren't able to defend it at the same level. And so I'm not saying the foul trouble was all of it. I am saying it kind of put him behind the 8 ball, like right from the get-go, where it was, hey, if you want to slow this guy down, if you want to stop him, you're kind of limited in what you can do there. And that's a tough deal. To be quite frank, when Kansas absolutely ran UCF off the floor, they had a healthy Shaq Moore on Darius Johnson. And so he was able to take that assignment, and he was outstanding at it. And I think that was another situation where Johnson was going to take advantage of just about any matchup that he got against KU, especially with Juan having foul trouble where he couldn't maybe body up on him the way that he would have liked to.
AL asks about the Arizona game. How worried are you about Kansas being exhausted against Arizona? In short, very worried. I mean, this was an emotional game that obviously went to overtime. Your starters were playing a lot of minutes. Hunter Dickinson ends up playing the second most minutes on the team with 39. KJ Adams played 40. Zeke Mayo played 38. Worried. Definitely worried. Today you saw – oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was sorry to cut you off. I was going to say I said earlier, basically, teams that played the day before, a lot of times their legs go kind of in between that first TV timeout and the second TV timeout of the second half. I felt like that was true today for UCF, where the legs started to go. That was when KU built the 13-point lead. And then KU let UCF right back into it. So it's not necessarily a death blow, but you definitely, when you're there in person, you can almost see it. It's almost tangible where it's like, hey, one team is kind of running out of gas. And the same way that I thought that would happen for UCF against Kansas, I would circle the same exact time period for Kansas tomorrow in terms of, hey, there's probably going to be a point there right around that time period, since Arizona hasn't played yet in the Big 12 tournament, where Kansas's legs are going to start to go. They're going to start to feel heavy because it's their second game in as many days. Arizona hasn't played a second game, and that's before you even account for the extra 5 minutes in this one.
Yeah. By the way, today of the 4 teams that were playing their second game after the opening round, they went 1-3. Ironically enough, it was Colorado who got the win.
Altitude.
Yeah, it was Colorado who got the win as the 16 seed over West Virginia. But Iowa State pretty much clobbered Cincinnati. They ended up winning by 20, and then Baylor handled K-State very easily as well. So the teams, as you said, Kevin, the teams that were playing their second game in 2 days generally didn't fare very well. I mean, UCF, I think a lot of credit deserves to them because they fared the best out of the other two teams that lost between K-State and Cincinnati. But yeah, I think that absolutely has to be a concern. And again, you mentioned it. That's not even really including the fact that this game went to overtime. So you're talking about an extra 5 minutes that Kansas had to play tonight. And you're talking about what I think the part of that maybe doesn't get highlighted enough is when that happens, you're talking about, okay, now you're not getting back to your hotel an extra 30 to 45 minutes later. Like everything is just pushed back for the players. You're not getting into your post-game recovery, and all of it's just delayed more and more and more. And that sets you up for kind of be behind the eight ball against Arizona, certainly. We got KC saying that Arizona is a 1-point favorites, by the way. One other thing I want to mention is I thought the crowd was great tonight.
I agree.
The Kansas crowd, I think, was really good. It seemed like there was a lot of Kansas fans there. They were getting loud, and that's great to see. Obviously, with the tournament being where it is, you hope that Kansas fans can get out there and support KU. And it seemed like they really did a good job of that tonight. And I felt like there was a really good atmosphere for that game.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That was something that came through on the broadcast where every time Kansas made a play, you could almost feel like the crowd was trying to pull a run, through them type of deal. And it was, if you haven't been to the Big 12 tournament at T-Mobile, I can't recommend it enough. The atmosphere is amazing, especially if you can get like a Kansas Iowa State game where the crowd's going to be kind of half and half or whatever. It's a terrific atmosphere. But the Kansas fans absolutely did their job tonight. It was. I don't like it when people call it a home game for KU because I think that there's so many things special about Allen Fieldhouse beyond just, hey, there's more KU fans than opposing fans here. But I did think that Kansas very tangibly, obviously, had a fan advantage playing at T-Mobile tonight, and I thought the fans were excellent.
I can't believe we have gone nearly 28 minutes, Kevin, and we have not talked about the immaculate, incredible, amazing court that they have at the Big 12 tournament. One of Brett Yormark's many ideas implemented with the court. I listen. I've seen some people say that the court doesn't look as bad in person, and I think I don't know. It's one of those things where you just kind of get used to it, I guess, watching on TV. I don't know. Do you have any strong court opinions? And I'm not talking about going to court to get a parking ticket. I'm talking about the court that Kansas played on.
Like Lion Witch of the Wardrobe, like the Narnia series and everything.
Yes.
The court kind of reminds me like what it would maybe look like inside the wardrobe, like on the floor of the wardrobe as you were walking through into Narnia. I don't know why, like that's what I think about. I think of like the inside of like an old hutch or a wardrobe or something like that. And like the really kind of wacky design that you have in there sometimes. And that's, it was definitely an eyesore. I did kind of crack up. A friend of mine who covers Oregon for 24/7 was like, I don't want to hear from any Big 12 fans about our Oregon court. And I wanted to be like, this does not absolve you, my friend. Like that Oregon
That's
court
true.
is just awful. But
the Oregon court is tough to look at as well.
Yeah, but at the same time, it is a pretty brutal look. But I think, Brett Yormark is willing to do a lot of things that get people talking about the Big 12. And if the court can be a little garish and that gets a few more, social media impressions, so be it.
That's true. I think Brett Yormark has maybe taken a page out of the old playbook of any publicity is good publicity. So if you have thousands of people saying how awful the court is on social media, that's good. That's engagement, I guess. I don't know. Listen, I went to KU for journalism, but I didn't do marketing and strategic communications. I went the other way. So I can't be sure. I wasn't in those classes. Let's take one more quick break, and then we'll kind of put a bow on this discussion a little bit more about the game.
DeJuan Harris, right?
Yes. Do want to get into a little bit of the DeJuan Harris discussion as well. So let's take a really quick break. We'll come back and we'll hit on wrap up on this conversation.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
This is the Paid Podcast here on the Kansas City Sports Network. Once again, huge shout out to everybody that's joining us live tonight on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. If you haven't already, you better subscribe, like the channel, and also drop a comment here live with us. And if you're listening after the fact, you can still comment. And if you're on the audio, you can give us a 5-star rating and review. You can find us on social media as well at Paid KCSN, also on Twitter/X. So I don't know. We'll see how long it lasts, I guess, on X. That's TBD on that one, I guess. I put a little asterisk there because who knows where that's going. But yeah, one other thing we haven't really touched on from this game, and this would be kind of, well, I guess two things really. We haven't talked about Ryland Griffin that much either. Noah mentioned it here, expecting a big game from him tomorrow. But he can kind of be lumped into this conversation, Kevin, in terms of some of the concerns for KU from this game is DeJuan Harris struggled tonight in a lot of ways. He was in foul trouble, like you had highlighted earlier. He wasn't very effective as a scorer. He was struggling on defense, I think maybe because of his foul trouble. Did end up with 7 assists, but also had 4 turnovers in the game. There was some sloppy play a bit. I guess, how worried are you about that? Because, the thought that kept running through my head as the game unfolded is with Diggy Coit, it becomes pretty clear early in the game whether or not it's going to be a game where he's going to be able to play a lot versus not based on the opponent. And obviously this game tonight was one where he ended up not playing very much because of the opponent. So depending on your matchup, you're going to be really handcuffed in that case. And obviously Shaq Moore, Bill Self mentioned he's been starting to practice a little bit, but I would say his chances of playing and certainly playing significant minutes is pretty much slim to zero at this point in the Big 12 tournament and even in the NCAA tournament as well. So when you start to look at it from that viewpoint, if DeJuan Harris is really struggling or having a bad game, like kind of what we saw tonight, Kansas just doesn't really have any other options potentially at that position. And that obviously kind of goes back to a conversation we had previously about guard play in March. And if DeJuan Harris is struggling and there's no other options, that could be a real concern for Kansas in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it could be the sort of thing that sends you home, right? And you look at, he was coming off of a game that I don't want to say it was one of his best games, but he was pretty solid against Arizona. He had a couple big buckets in key moments, hit a big 3-pointer, had the tip in, and wound up with, I think, 9 assists to 1 turnover. That's kind of the DeJuan we need to see. He doesn't need to be a 15 points guy. He doesn't need to take a ton of shots. It helps when he does get an open look if he can knock it down. But the big thing is, Nick, he needs to be there defensively and he needs to distribute without turning the ball over. And when he struggles at those two things like he did today, Kansas is going to have a bumpy ride because they need him to do that part of it. And so I'm not necessarily discouraged because he was coming off of a fairly strong game against Arizona. And so you have, a good game followed by a bad game. It's not like he's stacked, 3 or 4 bad games in a row. But at the same time, it is one of those things where Kansas needs more out of DeJuan. KC's got an interesting thing there on Shaq Moore from our good friend Henry over at the Lawrence Center World. Shaq being available, even if it's for, let's say, 10 minutes, would be a really big deal, I think, both because of what he brings from a defense and energy standpoint. You think about the game against Arizona and Lawrence. It was a game that Jaden Bradley really played well, and that's a guy that Shaq could potentially help with at least a little bit. At this time of year, anybody with fresh legs really helps. And to the point that Noah made about Ryland Griffin a little bit earlier, Ryland Griffin only played 18 minutes tonight. And so if you're looking for somebody that, hey, maybe this guy isn't going to feel the full impact of playing a game the day before, AJ Storr played 27 minutes, not used to playing 27 minutes. Hunter Dickinson played 39 minutes. That's obviously way more than you want Hunter to play. KJ Adams played 40 minutes. Dwan Harris, even with his foul trouble, even with him fouling out, played 36, which isn't necessarily out of the ordinary for him, but it's still more than you want him to play when he's playing a game the very next day. And so when you're looking and you're kind of going up and down the roster and saying, okay, who's maybe going to be fresh next year that could give Kansas a jolt tomorrow? I think, you look at Rylan Griffin only playing 18. You look at Diggy Coit playing 16. And like you said, you can kind of tell early on what version of Diggy Coit you're getting. And then Flaherty played 11 tonight. And some of that is because of the matchup that Keyshawn Hall represents, because it's really, really tough to play Flaherty at the 4 against Keyshawn Hall, because he just really takes advantage of that matchup. And so because of that, those guys, you add Shaq in there again, if KU can get 5 or 10 minutes from him tomorrow, that could be kind of a big deal, and could be a big deal in terms of getting Shaq some confidence and a little bit of run on the court before the NCAA tournament starts.
Bill Self has been pretty adamant, I would say, over the past couple of weeks about Shaq Moore, that he's not going to play him if he's not able to practice at least a little bit heading up to it. Like I said, it sounded like he's been able to practice the past couple of days a little bit, but look, if I'm Shaq Moore, I'm saying I'm available too.
It's the end of your college career, right?
Yeah, it's the postseason. Obviously, from the player perspective, Shaq Moore is going to do everything he can to get on the floor. I don't know that I would expect him to play tomorrow night against Arizona, but certainly I think the NCAA tournament becomes a much bigger possibility, I would say, at that point. But I personally would be pretty surprised if he played at all against Arizona tomorrow night. That's just kind of my read of the situation based off what Bill Self has said about wanting to make sure he gets practice and whatnot. That's just kind of my outside perspective. I'd be surprised if he plays tomorrow. In the NCAA tournament, certainly I think it's much more possible depending on how things go with his foot. So that is something to monitor. Yeah, you mentioned Flaherty. Flaherty didn't get to play much, kind of as you highlighted, because of how things kind of turned with that matchup. But the minutes that he did play, he kind of showed things that I was excited about. Had a couple really nice offensive rebounds and putbacks, and that's I think the type of Flaherty that Kansas could really benefit from in the NCAA tournament, where you're not asking him to be like your play like Hunter. You're asking him to come in as an energy guy, get offensive rebounds and play on the glass and make plays like that and be kind of explosive off the bench. That's great. I love that role for him. So hopefully he gets a chance to do a little bit more of that. With Rylan, it's a bit more of a head scratcher for me. I can't say I'm overly confident that he's going to have a big game, I guess, tomorrow night or really going forward. But I don't know if part of the reason why AJ played so much more down the stretch is because Rylan had his struggles in this game. He was 0-5, 0-3 from 3 and didn't really do much else. But he's certainly another player that if you get what you get from Hunter Dickinson, and Zeke Mayo's given you some as well, the combo of Rylan and AJ Storr combined can give you more from the perimeter. I think that's your recipe at that point.
Sure. And you can lean a little bit into the hot hand a little bit, right? If Rylan is making shots, maybe that's the game where Rylan gets 25 minutes and AJ Storr doesn't get quite as many minutes if AJ Storr isn't playing well. If AJ Storr is playing like he did tonight, maybe that goes a little bit more to AJ on that given night. But having both of those guys and having AJ, at least for one game, trending up, you do feel like you have another option on the perimeter there. And any extra option is a big deal for him at this point. But yeah, to your point, Flaherty scored 2 points against Arizona, which doesn't seem like a big deal. He also grabbed 2 offensive rebounds and had 2 blocked shots and a steal. That's kind of what Flaherty can do to be valuable with this team is, hey, get on the offensive glass, make a couple plays with your energy, maybe draw a foul or 2 in there, block the odd shot, and just be an athlete that makes the other team uncomfortable. If you can do that for 10 or 15 minutes in a game, that can be a way you can help Kansas win a game in March that's a close contest.
We've kind of danced around it quite a bit. Kansas is going to be playing Arizona tomorrow night. This is a team, obviously, that KU just saw, 5 days ago at this point. What's your early read on how things may go tomorrow night, or I guess tonight, as we're almost past midnight here in Central Time? How do you think this one might go? We kind of talked about it. Second game in less than 24 hours for Kansas. Arizona's had some rest, plus the combination of you already played this team, so the scouts should be fresh for both teams. How do you think this one goes?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating game because a lot of the things that Kansas struggles against, Arizona's not necessarily great at. We saw in that first matchup that Arizona was a little bit reluctant to shoot the ball from the outside, depending on who it was. Some of that is, Jaden Bradley scored, what did he score?
He finished with 21
points and didn't take a single three. And so from that perspective, when you look at the way that Kansas defended the arc or didn't defend the arc tonight, and it was awful. Maybe you get a little bit of a reprieve from that standpoint. The one thing that does worry me a little bit, Nick, in this matchup is Arizona's a really good rebounding team. And Kansas rebounded well in the first matchup against Arizona, didn't get beat on the glass. But when it's your second game in 2 days, when the other team is fresh, you don't want this turning into one of those contests like Utah, like at Houston, where you were just absolutely getting browbeaten for offensive boards and on the glass, and that turns against you. And so on one hand, I like the matchup because I feel like it's probably not going to be a game where Arizona comes out and makes 13 threes and you get buried beneath an avalanche of perimeter shots. On the other hand, Kansas is really going to need to be cognizant of, hey, block guys out, everybody to the glass. Do not let Arizona get extra possessions on this thing.
Well, and anytime you're going up against Caleb Love, like we talked about after the first Arizona matchup, he is the type of player that can take over a game. And if you're not on him on the perimeter, he could light you up in a big way. So that's obviously, I think it's always got to be in the back of your mind is you don't want to let him really start to get hot because he will become a volume shooter and can really, really bury you in a game. But yeah, beyond that, what you highlighted with the rebounding, totally echo that. That's where I think maybe Flory in this game might have a chance to play more. I think based on the fact that it's your second game in 2 days, Hunter played almost 40 minutes. Would love to see Flory, I think, get a little bit more out there and hopefully do his thing and get some rebounds and stay effective from that standpoint. But yeah, it's going to be an uphill battle, I think, certainly for Kansas. We'll see. Hopefully, KU crowd continues to come out and support again, like they did tonight against UCF. But beyond that, I think you're definitely going to need a better game from DeJuan Harris. That's point number one. You're definitely going to need a better game from DeJuan Harris, and you still want to continue to see that perimeter scoring from the combination of Zeke Mayo, continue what he did, and either Rylan Griffin stepping up, or maybe you get another solid game from AJ Storr as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is a team that now, at least over the last, the start of the season, 6 games ago, the effort has been a lot more consistent, right? I mean, you haven't seen a whole lot of extended periods like you did sort of before that 6-game stretch. And so I'm interested to see, hey, the motors aren't going to be running quite as hot. It's your second game in 2 days. Do they still find a way to make this thing a game, make it close, hang around and battle? And I think that would be one of the most positive indicators that you could see. Obviously, you want them to win the game, but at the same time, if they're right there with 30 seconds left and they've battled in their second game in as many days, despite Arizona being a really good team, I do think that you're starting to feel like, okay, this is a team that has at least solved some of those energy issues. The focus still wanes, and you saw that in this game where they get up 13 and immediately offensively they stopped, being as polished with what they were doing. Defensively, they, just gave up jumper after jumper that were just totally undefended, and even, the three that Ivy Curry hit late was a heck of a shot. And
that was a very March shot, by the way.
And I know, Zeke kind of hesitated a little bit getting over there because he saw Tom, I think he thought a screen was going to be there that didn't actually wind up being there, which gave Ivy Curry that little bit of space. And so I don't necessarily blame Zeke as much for that one specifically, but some of the other ones, I mean, guys are just catching wide open in rhythm, stepping into jumpers. It would be nice against a team that doesn't shoot a ton from the outside tomorrow if even so you saw Kansas be a little bit more polished with its rotations, where Arizona isn't getting those kinds of looks where they can just step into wide open shots.
Well, I think you saw that lack of focus even happen in the first half too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Kansas jumps out to an 8-0 lead, and they just kind of go on autopilot for like 4 minutes, and all of a sudden it's 16-14. UCF's right back in the game. So, yeah, I think there's a couple examples of that from this particular game against UCF where you kind of see that lack of focus negatively impact Kansas. So hopefully you get that cleaned up against Arizona tomorrow night. Speaking of Arizona tomorrow night, we are planning to be live once again on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jocks KCSN after the game. So if you're with us tonight, you're staying up late tonight, get some sleep and come back and join us again tomorrow night. And if you're listening on audio, we'll have that show as well very shortly thereafter the game tomorrow night against Arizona. Mentioned it earlier, this is a very busy week for us. We're also going to be talking with head baseball coach Dan Fitzgerald. So you want to keep an eye out on that for your feeds coming your way on YouTube and on Apple and Spotify as well. So keep an eye out for that. Kansas baseball 29-1 today over Minnesota in 7 innings. We'll ask Coach Dan Fitzgerald about that, about Kansas' start and the start of conference play coming up for KU as well this weekend. So be on the lookout for that, and continue to be on the lookout for our KU football spring position breakdown shows. We had our first one earlier in the week talking about the tight ends. So you have a chance to check that out as well. So but the bottom line is we got tons of KU content coming your way. Football, basketball, baseball, all of the above. You can all get it right here on KCSN with the show. And so be sure to subscribe if you haven't already on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jocks KCSN, and if on the audio, wherever you get your podcast as well. Kevin, you got any final thoughts before we end this show past midnight here, Central Time?
No. Crank the hog on Friday if you have a chance to go out there. Dollar Dog Night, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes. Yeah.
And so, obviously, if you have a chance to head downtown and head over to Power and Light and go to the Big 12 tournament, it's really cool. But if you're not able to make it over there, make it over to Hoagland. Head on over and enjoy it. Enjoy what the baseball team's doing right now because they're having a pretty special start. And I believe, is it Baylor that they're playing this weekend?
Yep,
who's off to a really good start. So could be some great college baseball out there. So
absolutely. And the weather's looking pretty good. It's going to get a little chillier, I guess, than it has been over the past couple of days. But even still, as Kevin said, definitely check that out. The student section has been great. We're going to talk to Dan Fitzgerald about that as well coming up. So be on the lookout for that. As always, thank you so much, guys, for your support of the show. It means everything to us. I really appreciate Trey. Thank you so much for dropping some comments and sharing some comments as well. Thanks so much to everybody that's dropped comments tonight. Really appreciate you joining us live. And if you're listening after the fact, appreciate you just as much. Listen, this is an equal opportunity household. Okay. We're not favorites. We don't play favorites. However you're listening, however you're watching, we really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. And for Kevin Flaherty, I'm Nick Springer. We'll be back here again tomorrow night, KU in Arizona, and stay tuned for that and plenty more. But until then, we'll talk to you again soon. See ya.